The exit sign was dead before anyone noticed the door was locked. Emily Carter saw it while carrying a silver tray of champagne through the back corridor of Ironwood Pack House, where servants moved quickly, quietly, and never in the center of the hall. The green letters above the east emergency door should have glowed through the smoke from the kitchen and the gold spill of light from the grand ballroom. They did not. The sign hung dark against the stone wall. That was wrong. Emily slowed. Only half a step. Enough for the champagne glasses to tremble on her tray. Keep moving, Mrs. Bell hissed behind her. The Alpha delegation arrives in 2 minutes. Yes, ma'am. Emily lowered her eyes and walked on, because waitresses who stopped in royal corridors were not asked what they had seen. They were told what they had done wrong. At 24, Emily Carter had learned the shape of being invisible. Pale skin under harsh kitchen lamps. Brown hair pinned too tightly beneath a black ribbon. White apron tied over a plain black serving dress. Hands always full. Mouth always closed. Shoulders trained to narrow whenever someone important passed. Tonight, Ironwood Pack House glittered as if danger could be polished away. The Alliance Conference had filled the grand hall with Alpha Lords, Beta officers, Luna representatives, council elders, and guards wearing formal black uniforms. Golden chandeliers burned above long tables dressed in white linen. Crystal glasses waited beside folded napkins. Black banners marked with the Ironwood wolf hung from the rafters, stirring faintly in the draft. There should have been a draft near the east exit. Emily felt none. That stopped her more than the dead sign had. Her father used to say doors spoke before people did. A working exit breathed. Air slipped beneath it. Hinges cooled. Old wood shifted when the pressure changed between rooms. A locked door went still in a different way. Not closed. Held. Emily turned her head. The east emergency door stood at the end of the corridor, painted black, iron handle polished from years of use. During any royal gathering, it was required to remain unsealed. Fire law, pack law, common sense. Tonight, a new chain ran through the inner bar. Bright steel, fresh, too clean. Her fingers tightened around the tray. A chain did not appear on an emergency exit by mistake. Not on the night Alpha King Alexander Blackwood was expected to stand before 7 northern packs and announce whether the alliance would hold. Not in a building where every servant had been searched twice. Not when Beta Mason Vale had personally taken charge of security. Emily looked back toward the ballroom. Music floated through the open double doors, soft and expensive. Nobles laughed under the chandeliers. A waiter passed with roasted pheasant. Someone shouted for more wine. Life continued as if the room did not have fewer ways out than it had 10 minutes ago. Emily. Mrs. Bell's voice cracked like a whip. Emily moved again. The champagne tray was heavier now. She passed through the service arch into the grand hall, where heat, perfume, candle wax, and power pressed against her face all at once. No one looked at her except to take a glass. Fingers snapped. Rings flashed. Men in tailored coats spoke over her head. Women in silk turned their shoulders so she could not brush their sleeves. Invisible. Useful. Silent. That was the place assigned to her. But the dark exit sign burned in her mind brighter than any chandelier. Emily crossed the hall slowly, counting doors without appearing to count them. East exit. Locked. North servants' passage. Blocked by 2 unfamiliar guards. West terrace doors. Closed. No wind beneath them. Her pulse changed. Not faster. Lower. Heavier. The way it had when she was a child sitting on the floor of her father's locksmith shop, watching him test hinges, false keys, and trap bolts while he whispered that a door designed to save lives should never sound like a cage. Then the entire hall went quiet. Not because of Emily. Because Alpha King Alexander Blackwood had arrived. Every glass lowered. Every conversation died. Every guard straightened. Emily felt the silence move before she dared look up. Alexander entered through the main doors in a black formal coat fastened with a silver wolf clasp, tall and broad-shouldered. His face carved in cold lines that made men remember their manners. His dark hair was swept back from gray eyes that did not admire the room. They measured it. Beside him walked Beta Mason Vale. Calm, elegant, trusted. He smiled as if he had built the night himself and found it flawless. Emily watched his gaze slide past the tables, past the nobles, past the Alpha King he was meant to protect, to the exits. Only then did Emily understand what frightened her most. Mason was not checking whether the doors were safe. He was checking whether they were still locked. Alexander Blackwood did not enter rooms like other men. Other men arrived with noise. They laughed too loudly, accepted bows too slowly, touched shoulders they wanted beneath them, and waited for power to be noticed. Alexander brought silence with him. It moved ahead of his boots across the polished floor of Ironwood Pack House, passing over the long tables, the crystal glasses, the golden candles, the nervous smiles of council elders, and the lowered eyes of servants who had been trained to vanish before authority reached them. Emily Carter stood near the wine station with a tray balanced against her hip and watched the entire hall rearrange itself around one man. Not visibly. That would have been too honest. The alphas straightened first, then the betas, then the guards along the wall. Conversations paused and returned softer. Women in silk lowered their voices. Men who had been leaning back in their chairs sat forward as if their spines had remembered danger. Alexander stopped at the center of the hall. His gray eyes swept the room once. East wall, balcony, west terrace, main doors, servants' arch. He measured everything like a man who had survived by trusting distance more than promises. For one brief second, Emily felt something close to relief. He would see it. Of course he would. The dead exit sign. The missing draft. The unfamiliar guards. The west terrace doors sealed too tightly. The servants' passage blocked by men who did not carry the true Ironwood crest. A king who looked at rooms that way had to notice when a hall had become a cage. Then Beta Mason Vale stepped beside him. The relief died. Mason wore dark formal wool with a silver chain across his chest and the relaxed expression of a man everyone trusted because no one had ever survived proving otherwise. His blonde hair was combed neatly back. His smile was controlled. His gloved hands rested behind him, calm and empty. He leaned slightly toward Alexander and said something Emily could not hear. Alexander's gaze left the exits. Only for a moment, but long enough. Mason lifted 2 fingers. A small signal. The unfamiliar guards at the servants' passage shifted into place. Not much. Enough to close the space between their shoulders. Emily's stomach tightened. She looked around, hoping someone else had noticed. No one had. A Luna representative laughed behind a fan. A council elder adjusted his gold cufflinks. A young beta accepted champagne from Emily's tray without meeting her eyes. Life continued beautifully in a room, losing its exits 1 quiet inch at a time. Emily turned toward the west terrace doors. A footman she knew, Daniel, passed near them with an empty tray. He reached for the handle, probably to let in air. One of Mason's strange guards touched his arm. Daniel stopped. The guard smiled. Daniel stepped away. Emily's fingers went cold around the tray. Mason was not only locking doors. He was making sure no one tested them. Alexander moved toward the high table where his chair waited beneath the Ironwood banner. Mason walked half a step behind him, exactly where a loyal beta should stand. Close enough to protect. Close enough to whisper. Close enough to put a knife between ribs before a king knew the hand belonged to betrayal. Emily knew that thought was dangerous. A waitress did not accuse a beta. A waitress did not look at an Alpha King's right hand and think traitor. A waitress certainly did not decide that the most powerful man in the room was standing beside the reason no one would be able to escape it. But her father's voice rose in memory. A locked door is never just a locked door, Em. Ask who wants people inside. Emily swallowed. Alexander reached the high table. Mason turned slightly, giving the hall another careful glance. Again, not at faces. At doors. East exit. North passage. West terrace. Balcony stairs. His eyes lingered on each one with the satisfaction of a man counting traps already set. Then his gaze found Emily. For half a second, his smile did not change. That was what frightened her. He had seen her seeing him. A champagne glass chimed on her tray as her hand trembled. Mason started toward her. Slowly, politely, like a trusted beta crossing a hall to correct a servant before she made an embarrassing mistake. Emily lowered her eyes because every rule in her life told her to. But beneath the tray, her other hand closed around the napkin ring she had taken from the west table. A small brass ring, heavy enough to hold linen, small enough to throw. She did not know what she would do with it yet. She only knew the Alpha King had entered a locked room, and the man everyone trusted was watching the doors. The second locked door was quieter than the first. That made it worse. Emily Carter found it while carrying empty champagne glasses toward the west side of the hall, where the terrace doors stood beneath two tall windows glazed black by night. Those doors were supposed to open onto the stone balcony overlooking the lower gardens. During crowded gatherings, servants used them to clear smoke, bring in air, and give nervous nobles somewhere to pretend they were not afraid of each other. Tonight, no one stood near them. No breeze slipped beneath the frame. No candle flame bent toward the gap. The terrace doors looked closed, but not naturally. Held. Emily set her empty glasses on a sideboard and reached for a folded napkin as if straightening the table. Her hand brushed the brass handle. Cold. Too cold. She pressed down. Nothing moved. A bolt had been thrown from the outside. Her breath stopped. A door locked from inside was caution. A door locked from outside was captivity. Something wrong with the napkins? The voice came from behind her. Emily turned too quickly. Beta Mason Vale stood 3 steps away, smiling with the kind of patience powerful men used before punishment. The golden light from the chandeliers caught the clean line of his jaw, the silver chain on his coat, the pale dust clinging to his right sleeve near the cuff. White powder. Not flour. Not ash. Lock chalk. Her father used to rub it across new mechanisms to see where metal scraped before a key settled properly. It clung to fabric if a man leaned too close while testing a fresh bolt. Emily's eyes dropped to it for half a second. Mason saw. Of course he saw. His smile thinned. I asked you a question, he said. Emily lowered her head. No, sir. I was checking the table. The table is not outside. No, sir. His gaze moved to her tray, then to the terrace handle, then back to her face. Servants become nervous during important nights, Mason said. They imagine things. Emily's fingers curled around the napkin until the linen creased. At the far end of the hall, Alexander Blackwood had taken his seat beneath the ironwood banner. Council elders surrounded him. Alphas leaned in. Guards stood in their formal positions, still as black statues. Wrong positions. Emily saw it then because fear had sharpened the room. The king's loyal guards stood deep inside the hall, closer to the high table, farther from the doors. The unfamiliar men stood near every exit. North Passage, West Terrace, East Corridor, balcony stairs. A pattern, not protection. Containment. Emily looked toward the servants' passage. 2 guards blocked it now, shoulder to shoulder. Their uniforms were almost right, but the ironwood crest on their collars sat too high. The wolf head angled wrong. A copied badge. Good enough for nobles who never looked at servants' doors. Not good enough for a locksmith's daughter who had grown up watching her father repair locks beneath that exact crest. Mason stepped closer. You are pale, Miss Carter. She hated that he knew her name. I'm fine. No, he said softly. You are curious. The word felt like a hand closing around her throat. Before she could answer, a young kitchen boy hurried toward the north passage with a tray of fresh bread. One of the false guards stopped him. The boy tried to slip around. The guard pushed him back. Bread rolls spilled across the floor. The hall barely noticed. Emily did. Alexander Blackwood lifted his head at the faint disturbance, but Mason turned at once, blocking his view with a practiced step and a pleasant sentence meant for the council table. Smooth. Too smooth. Emily's heart beat hard against her ribs. 3 locked exits. False guards. Chalk on Mason's sleeve. The Alpha King's men placed far from the doors. This was not a security plan. This was a cage built during a feast. Mason leaned close enough that only she could hear him. Return to the wine station, he said, and forget what doors feel like. Emily looked down because fear told her to, but obedience no longer fit. Across the hall, Alexander reached for the ceremonial glass that would open the conference. The nobles straightened. The musicians quieted. Every face turned toward the king. No one looked at the exits. No one except Emily. And Mason. She stepped back with her empty tray in both hands. Her pulse counting seconds she did not have. East door chained. West terrace bolted from outside. North passage blocked by false guards. If the attack came now, the entire hall would run toward doors that would not open. Emily looked at Alexander Blackwood. Cold. Powerful. Unwarned. Then she looked at the brass napkin ring still hidden in her palm. A small object. Almost nothing. But almost nothing was all a waitress ever got. And somewhere above the chandeliers, from the shadowed balcony, a boot shifted against wood. The boot moved again. Only once. A soft scrape above the chandeliers, almost swallowed by the hush settling over Ironwood Pack House, as Alpha King Alexander Blackwood prepared to open the Alliance Conference. Every noble in the hall turned toward the high table. Every glass lifted slightly. Every guard faced inward toward the king. Wrong. So wrong that Emily Carter felt the truth lock around her ribs. Guards were supposed to watch out. Toward doors. Toward balconies. Toward windows and hands and shadows. But Mason Vale had placed them all facing the room like ornaments around a throne. Loyal men boxed in by ceremony. False men near the exits. A hidden boot above the lights. A chain on the east door. A bolt on the west. A servant's passage blocked by strangers wearing copied crests. The attack was not coming from outside. It was already inside. Emily moved before fear could negotiate with her. She stepped away from the sideboard and crossed the hall with the empty tray held in both hands, the brass napkin ring hidden beneath her fingers. She did not run. Running would bring guards. Running would bring Mason. Running would get her dragged out before she reached the king. So she walked like a waitress. Small. Silent. Useful. A man took a glass from her tray before realizing it was empty and frowned as if she had insulted him personally. A woman in green silk snapped her fingers for wine. Emily did not stop. Her eyes stayed on the high table, on Alexander's hand resting beside the ceremonial glass, on the space at his shoulder where Mason should not have been trusted to stand. 5 steps. 4. 3. Alexander's gaze moved across the room. For one impossible second, it found her. Emily almost stopped. His eyes were colder up close. Not empty. Worse. Awake in a way that made lies feel suddenly fragile. He saw her pale face, the too tight grip on the tray, the fear she had tried and failed to hide. Then Mason stepped between them. Miss Carter. His voice was gentle. His hand was not. He caught her wrist beneath the tray, fingers closing over skin already chilled from the locked terrace handle. Pain flashed up her arm. The brass napkin ring dug into her palm. A waitress has no right to approach the Alpha King during opening vows, Mason said. Nearby nobles turned. A ripple of irritation passed through them. Not concern. Never concern. Only annoyance that a servant had allowed her fear to enter the shape of their evening. Emily tried to pull free. I need to speak to him. Mason smiled. You need to return to your station. Alexander had not looked away. That was the only reason Emily kept breathing. Your Majesty, she said, louder than a whisper. The hall cooled. Mason's grip tightened. Do not embarrass yourself, he said softly. A noblewoman laughed behind a fan. Ironwood should train its girls better. Someone else muttered, servants always want drama when kings are present. Emily's face burned. Her wrist hurt. Above the chandeliers, the boot shifted a third time. She looked at Alexander. Not Mason. Not the nobles. The king. The exits, she said. Mason jerked her wrist down hard enough that the tray struck her hip. She is overtired, he said smoothly. Kitchen staff have been working since dawn. Emily gasped, but forced the words through. The east door is chained. For the first time, Alexander's expression changed. Not much. Enough. Mason felt it. His smile disappeared at the edges. Remove her, he ordered. 2 guards stepped forward. Not Alexander's guards. The false ones from the North Passage. Emily saw the wrong crest as they came toward her. The wolf head tilted too high. Her father would have hated that mistake. He used to say a forged mark was never just a lie. It was proof the liar thought no one small would look closely. One guard reached for her arm. Emily lifted the tray between them. The west terrace is bolted from outside. A murmur broke across the hall. Mason turned, voice rising for the first time. Enough. His hand moved toward her mouth. That was his mistake. Emily opened her fingers. The brass napkin ring fell from her palm, hit the marble floor, and rolled beneath the high table with a sharp metallic chime. Every eye followed it. Every eye except Emily's. She looked past Mason's shoulder. At the balcony. At the shadow where the boot had gone still. At the thin dark shape bending beneath the railing. Bowstring. Her heart stopped. Alexander began to rise. Mason saw him move and reached for his sleeve. Emily had one breath left before the room became a slaughterhouse. She used it. Your beta locked the exits, she said, clear enough for the king to hear. And there is someone on the balcony. For half a second, nobody moved. That was the mercy, not belief, not rescue, only shock. The kind of shock that comes when a waitress says the forbidden thing loudly enough for velvet, gold, rank, and royal blood to hear it. Your beta locked the exits. The words hung beneath the chandeliers like smoke. Then the hall turned on her. A nobleman shoved back his chair. A Luna representative gasped. Someone near the west tables laughed, because laughter was easier than fear. The two false guards moved faster now, coming toward Emily Carter with hands already open to seize her. Mason Vale smiled again. Not the polite smile. The real one. Cold. Thin. Almost relieved. "You have made a dangerous mistake," he said. Emily did not look at him. She looked at the balcony. The shadow beneath the railing had shifted lower. A bow was no longer only a shape. It was a line. Dark wood. Drawn string. Arrowhead angled downward toward the high table. Toward Alexander Blackwood's heart. The Alpha King had risen halfway from his chair. His eyes followed Emily's gaze, and for the first time that night, he looked above the chandeliers instead of at the room prepared for him. Mason saw that too. His hand shot out, gripping Alexander's sleeve as if steadying his king, as if stopping him. Emily's blood went cold. The arrow would fly before Alexander could step away. She had no rank, no weapon, no right to touch a king. Only the empty silver tray in her hands and the terrible knowledge that a room full of powerful people was still waiting for permission to be afraid. So Emily stopped waiting. She swung the tray, not at Mason, not at the guards, at the ceremonial glass beside Alexander's hand. Silver struck crystal. The sound cracked through the hall like a gunshot. The glass flew from the table, shattered against the marble, and sent red wine spilling across the king's boots. Alexander moved by instinct, one sharp step back from the sudden break, just as Mason's grip tightened too late around empty air. The arrow came down, fast, silent until it was not. It struck the high-backed chair where Alexander's chest had been 1 second earlier, burying deep into black oak with a sound that silenced every scream before it formed. The hall understood. Not fully. Enough. Emily felt it pass through them. The cold realization that if she had not broken that glass, if she had not made the king move, the arrow would not be trembling in carved wood. It would be in him. Alexander looked at the arrow, then at Emily. Something changed in his face. Not gratitude. Not yet. Recognition. Mason recovered first. "Assassins," he shouted. "Protect the king." But his eyes were not on the balcony. They were on Emily. The false guards reached her. One caught her arm. The other grabbed the tray and tore it from her hands. Pain flashed through her shoulder, but Emily twisted toward Alexander before they could drag her away. "The guards at the exits are not yours," she said. Mason stepped close enough that only she should have heard him, but the room had gone too quiet. "You should have stayed invisible." Emily's breath shook. She looked down at his sleeve. The white lock chalk was still there. Now wine had splashed across it from the shattered glass, turning the powder into pale streaks that marked his cuff like evidence trying to speak. Alexander saw it. His gaze dropped to Mason's sleeve. Mason noticed a heartbeat later. For the first time, fear touched the Beta's perfect face. Then the chandeliers went out. All at once, the grand hall vanished into darkness. From the locked doors came the sound of chains tightening. From the balcony came the scrape of more bows being drawn. And from every exit in Ironwood Pack House came the same impossible truth. None of them would open. Darkness did not make the hall silent. It made every hidden thing louder. The first scream came from the west tables when someone threw themselves against the terrace doors and found them sealed from the outside. The second came from the east corridor, where the new chain snapped tight against iron and refused to give. Chairs overturned. Glass shattered. Silk tore against table corners. A nobleman shouted for guards, not yet understanding that some of the guards were the reason no one could leave. Emily Carter could not see the balcony anymore, but she heard it. Bowstrings. More than one. Soft pulls above the chandeliers, each one a thin, deadly whisper in the dark. The false guard holding her arm dragged her backward. His fingers crushed into the bruise Mason had already left, and pain shot up to her shoulder. Emily twisted hard, but he was stronger, armored under the stolen uniform, his copied ironwood crest scraping against her sleeve. "Move," he hissed. Not away from danger. Toward the north passage. Toward the place where servants disappeared when no one important wanted witnesses. Emily dug her heels into the marble. The spilled wine under her shoes made the floor slick. She almost fell. Then a voice cut through the dark. "Down." Alexander Blackwood did not shout like a frightened man. He commanded like the room still belonged to him. The word struck the hall with enough force that bodies dropped before minds understood. Nobles fell beneath tables. Servants crouched behind sideboards. Loyal guards threw themselves over council elders. Emily hit her knees as the false guard stumbled, and the next volley of arrows tore through the space where heads had been seconds before. Wood cracked. Crystal exploded. One arrow buried itself in the wall above the servant's arch. Another struck the empty chair where Alexander had stood. Emily's breath stopped. Empty. He had moved. Because of the tray. Because of the glass. Because she had made him step back before the first arrow found him. A hand seized the collar of the false guard, dragging her. The man was ripped away from Emily so violently that his grip vanished from her arm. In the darkness, she saw only a shape, tall, black-coated, moving with impossible precision through panic and broken light from the few emergency candles still burning near the floor. Alexander. He caught the false guard by the throat and slammed him against the high table. "Who gave the order?" he asked. The guard choked instead of answering. Mason's voice rose from somewhere near the dais. "Protect the exits. The girl is part of it." The lie moved quickly because fear needed someone small to blame. A hand grabbed Emily's hair from behind. She gasped. The false guard she had not seen pulled her back and pressed cold metal near her side. "Not deep. Not yet." A warning made of silver. She knew the doors, Mason said. She distracted the king. She broke the glass to signal the attack. For one terrifying second, the hall believed him. Emily felt it in the dark, suspicion turning toward her. The old, familiar shape of every room deciding a waitress was easier to accuse than a beta. Then Alexander spoke. "She warned me before the first arrow." The hall stilled. Not safe. Never safe. But listening. Mason said, "A clever traitor would." Alexander's answer came low. "A clever traitor would not move me out of the arrow's path." The silver at Emily's side trembled. The guard holding her was afraid now. Good. Above them, a shadow moved along the balcony rail, trying to reposition for another shot. Emily saw the shape only because lightning flashed beyond the tall windows, turning the hall white for half a heartbeat. She saw the archer. She saw the rope tied to the chandelier chain. She saw Mason's hand lift. A signal. "No," Emily whispered. Alexander heard her. Of course he did. "What?" Her voice shook, but the words came. "The chandelier." Another flash of lightning. Alexander looked up. The archer cut the rope. The massive chandelier dropped. Not over the tables. Not over the nobles. Over the exact place where Alexander had stepped after saving her. Emily moved without thinking. She drove her heel down on the false guard's foot, twisted from his grip, and shoved the nearest service card into Alexander's side with all the strength she had. The card hit him hard enough to move him 2 steps. The chandelier crashed down behind him. Gold, glass, and flame struck marble in a thunder of sparks. Heat slapped Emily's face. The hall screamed. Alexander turned slowly toward the wreckage, then toward Emily. The firelight showed his face at last. Cold no longer. Dangerous. Awake. And fully aware that the waitress everyone wanted dragged away had just saved his life a second time. Mason Vale stepped back into the shadows. Too late. Alexander saw him move. "Seal the balcony," the Alpha King ordered. "Take every guard wearing a false crest alive." Then his eyes found Emily through smoke and shattered gold. "Stay behind me." For the first time that night, it was not a dismissal. It was protection. Alexander Blackwood turned the locked hall into a battlefield before the traitors understood they had lost control of their own trap. That was the first thing Emily Carter saw through the smoke. Not panic. Not escape. Command. The fallen chandelier burned in broken pieces across the marble floor, gold arms twisted, candles hissing where wine and flame met. Nobles crouched beneath tables. Servants pressed themselves behind sideboards. Loyal guards tried to find enemies in a darkness built to confuse them. Alexander did not look confused. "Tables on their sides," he ordered. "Protect the civilians. Keep low. No one touches the exits until I say." His voice moved through Ironwood Pack House like a hand closing around chaos. Men obeyed. Chairs scraped. Tables flipped. White linen became shields. The high table was shoved forward to block the center aisle. Guards wearing the true Ironwood crest formed a line around the elders and Luna representatives, while the false guards near the doors hesitated, suddenly unsure whether they were still hidden. Emily stayed behind Alexander because he had told her to. For once, obedience felt strange. Not small. Safe. Her wrist throbbed where Mason had gripped her. Her knees shook from the force of shoving the service cart. Smoke burned her throat. The silver tray lay somewhere in the dark, dented, useless, and somehow more honest than half the men in the room. Mason Vale stepped from the shadows near the dais. His coat remained neat. That was obscene. In a hall full of broken glass, bloodless fear, smoke, and nearly murdered royalty, the Beta still looked deranged. Only his sleeve betrayed him. White lock chalk smeared with wine, pale streaks across dark fabric, and a thin shine of oil near the cuff where chain metal had rubbed. Emily saw it. So did Alexander. Mason lifted both hands. "My king, we must remove the girl." She knew the doors. She shouted the warning too late. She caused the first distraction, then moved you into position for the chandelier. A few frightened faces turned toward Emily. Of course they did. Fear always looked for the person easiest to punish. Emily felt the old instinct rise. Lower your eyes. Apologize. Survive by shrinking. Then Alexander stepped half a pace in front of her. "Say that again," he said. Mason paused. "My king." "Accuse her again." The hall seemed to stop breathing. Mason smiled carefully. "I am trying to protect you." "No," Alexander said. "You are trying to make me forget she moved me out of an arrow's path and a falling chandelier within the same minute." Mason's jaw tightened. Above them, boots pounded across the balcony as loyal guards reached the archers. A shout. A struggle. One bough clattered down through smoke and struck the floor near the broken glass. Emily flinched. Alexander did not. He looked at the false guards near the north passage. Kneel. They did not. That was answer enough. The first false guard ran for the east corridor. Emily reacted before anyone else. "The chain opens outward," she called. "He cannot leave unless someone outside releases it." Alexander's captain moved instantly, cutting him off before he reached the door. The guard drew a silver blade from beneath his coat. The room saw it. A copied crest could be dismissed. A locked door could be explained. A silver blade in a royal conference could not. Steel flashed. The false guard was thrown down, his knife kicked across the floor. Another false guard grabbed a council elder as a shield. Emily saw the wrong badge on his collar. "The crest," she said, voice shaking but clear. "The wolf head is too high. They are not Ironwood." The captain's eyes snapped to the badge, then to every man at the exits. "Check the collars," he barked. The loyal guards moved. Suddenly, Mason's careful trap began tearing open by its seams. One false guard tried to deny it. Another reached for a hidden weapon. A third surrendered before anyone touched him. Their badges were close enough to fool nobles, close enough to pass in candlelight, close enough for anyone who had never had to study small things because small things were all they were allowed to own. Not close enough for Emily. Mason's face changed. Only slightly. But Alexander saw that too. "Your Majesty," Mason said, colder now. "You are letting a waitress direct your guards." Alexander turned his head. She noticed what my Beta wanted hidden. The words struck harder than any shout. Emily's throat tightened. Mason looked at her then. Not like a servant. Like a problem that had survived too long. He reached slowly into his coat. Alexander moved. But Mason was not reaching for a knife. He pulled out a ring of keys and threw them into the fire where the chandelier had fallen. The metal vanished beneath flame and broken gold. Several nobles cried out. Mason smiled at last. "Then let her open the doors she is so fond of discussing." Emily stared at the burning wreckage. The keys were gone. The hall was still locked. The exits still sealed. The attack not over. Alexander looked at Emily, not with doubt, but with a question no one important had ever trusted her enough to ask. "Can you?" Emily looked at the east door. At the chain. At the hinge pins. At the chalk on Mason's sleeve. At the memory of her father's hands turning impossible locks under lamplight. Her fear did not leave. It stood beside her. She lifted her chin. "Yes," she said, "but I need a knife, a candle, and someone strong enough to break the hinge when I tell him." The knife came first. Not from a guard. From Alexander Blackwood. He drew it from beneath his black formal coat and placed it handle first into Emily Carter's hand, as if giving a weapon to a waitress in front of an entire royal hall was the most natural thing a king could do. The blade was not silver. She noticed that before she noticed its weight. Dark steel. Balanced. Sharp enough to split a breath. Emily's fingers closed around it. Across the burning wreckage of the chandelier, Mason Vale laughed once. This is what your crown has become? A waitress with a knife? Alexander did not look at him. No, a traitor with nowhere left to hide. A loyal guard brought a candle, shielding the flame with one broad palm. Another stepped to Emily's side, huge and silent, waiting for her command with the awkward stiffness of a man who had never expected to take orders from someone in a serving apron. Emily looked at the east exit. The chain had been run through the inner bar, but the lock itself was wrong. Too new, too bright, too low on the frame. Mason had wanted people to see the chain if they reached it in panic, to believe the lock was the problem. But the real hold was at the hinge. Her father had taught her that. When she was 7, he had sat her on the counter of his locksmith shop and placed 2 doors drawn in chalk before her. One honest, one false. People look for locks, trap makers use hinges. Emily swallowed against the smoke burning her throat. My father made these doors, she said. The words came out quieter than she intended. Alexander heard them anyway. Mason stopped smiling. Emily crouched by the hinge side of the east exit. Or repaired them. Years ago, he told me ironwood emergency doors were built to break outward if the hinge pins were heated and struck. In case of fire. In case of siege. She angled the candle beneath the lower hinge. The guard beside her frowned. That will take too long. No, Emily said. Not if someone replaced the pins. She scraped the knife along the hinge seam. White chalk flaked away. Under it, the metal showed a hairline groove where a false pin had been slid into place. Fresh work. Careless work. Work done by someone who believed the people trapped inside would be too frightened to look below eye level. Emily glanced back at Mason. You did not just lock the exits. You made sure the emergency brake would fail. Mason's face hardened. Alexander's voice was low. Continue. Emily placed the knife tip into the groove. Heat weakens the wax seal. The candle flame licked the hinge. Smoke curled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then black wax began to sweat from the seam. The captain swore. Emily looked at the large guard. When I say, strike here. Not the lock. The hinge. The guard nodded. Mason moved suddenly. Not toward Alexander. Toward Emily. He lunged through smoke with a silver blade hidden against his wrist, fast enough that several nobles screamed before the guards could close the distance. Alexander intercepted him. The impact shook the floor. Mason's knife struck Alexander's forearm guard and skidded away in a flash of silver. Alexander seized him by the throat and slammed him against the high table hard enough to silence the hall. You tried to kill me, Alexander said. Mason's eyes burned. I tried to save the Packs from a king who trusts servants over blood. Emily stood slowly. Her fear went cold. My father was blood to no one important either, she said. You had him dismissed after he refused to build locks that trapped people from the outside. Mason's gaze snapped to her. There it was. Recognition. Alexander saw it. Emily turned back to the hinge. Now. The guard struck. Once. The hinge screamed. Twice. The false pin split loose and shot across the marble. A breath of winter air slipped through the door. The entire hall felt it. Fresh air. Escape. Proof. The guard struck a third time. The east emergency door burst outward against the chain, not fully open, but enough to show the new lock hanging useless from a bar that had never been the true prison. People began to cry, not from fear now, from the sudden understanding that the waitress had known the shape of their cage better than the beta who claimed to guard them. Emily leaned against the wall, shaking. Alexander still held Mason pinned. His eyes moved from the broken hinge to Emily, and something in them changed again. Not surprised this time. Respect made visible. She is not guessing, Alexander said to the hall. She is testifying. Emily lifted the knife in her trembling hand and pointed toward the west terrace. There will be another false pin there, she said. And if Mason used my father's design, the map of every lock he changed is not in the guard room. Mason went still. Emily looked at him. It is in the beta's office. The beta's office was locked from the inside. That was the first proof that Mason Vale had not expected to lose. His office stood behind the north balcony stairs, beyond a narrow corridor lined with old ironwood portraits and smoke-dark sconces. The attack still raged in pieces behind them, but Alexander Blackwood's guards had taken the balcony, captured 3 archers alive, and forced the false guards to their knees beside the broken chandelier. The hall was no longer a cage. Not fully. The east door breathed winter air through its damaged hinge. Loyal guards held the opening. Servants and elders were being moved away from the center tables, one group at a time, low and fast, while Alexander kept Mason pinned between two royal guards with iron at his wrists. But Emily Carter had been right. The map was not in the guardroom, and Mason knew it. He had gone very still when she said office. Too still. Now Emily stood before his door with Alexander at her shoulder, a candle in one hand and the king's dark steel knife in the other. Her serving dress smelled of smoke. Her white apron was stained with wine and soot. Her wrist burned where Mason had gripped her, and every muscle in her body wanted to fold. But the door was wrong. That kept her standing. "It is locked from inside," the captain said after testing the handle. Emily shook her head. "No, it is meant to look that way." The captain glanced at Alexander. Alexander did not look away from Emily. "Show us." She crouched beside the doorframe. Her father's voice came back with painful clarity. "A guilty lock always tries to tell an innocent story." Emily held the candle near the lower edge. There, beneath the brass plate, a line of white chalk marked the seam. Fresh, smudged, hidden by shadow. "He used a reverse latch," she said. "The handle will not open because the catch is pinned from this side, not inside." The captain's expression darkened, so he could seal it after leaving, and claim no one entered. Mason laughed softly behind them. Even in chains, he sounded certain enough to frighten people. "Or," he said, "the waitress is inventing a story because she has touched every lock tonight." Emily did not answer him. She slid the knife beneath the brass plate and twisted. The metal resisted. Her hand shook. Then Alexander's hand closed over hers. Not to take the knife. To steady it. "Again," he said. Together, they turned the blade. The latch snapped. The door opened inward. Cold air spilled out. Not from a window. From a hidden passage behind the bookcase, already cracked open, carrying the smell of wet stone, oil, and escape. Mason stopped laughing. Inside the office, everything was neat. Too neat. A desk polished black. Shelves of ledgers. A silver inkstand. Folded correspondence stacked by date. A wall map of Ironwood Pack House hung behind the chair, its exits marked in red wax. Emily walked toward it slowly. Her knees nearly failed when she saw her father's handwriting in the lower corner. Carter mechanism. East emergency hinge. West terrace false pin. North passage containment bar. Cellar release route. The room blurred. Not because of smoke. Because for years, people had said her father left Ironwood in disgrace. That he had been careless. That he had failed the pack and lost his place because a locksmith without rank should never have argued with a beta. But his design had not been careless. It had been altered. Mason had stolen the work he refused to build. Emily touched the corner of the map with 2 fingers. "My father drew the safe version," she whispered. Mason changed it into a trap. Alexander looked at the handwriting, then at her face. Mason's voice hardened. "Sentiment is not evidence." The captain opened the desk drawers. The 3rd drawer stuck. Emily turned at the sound. False bottom. The captain broke it open. Inside lay a second map. This one was Mason's. Not drawn in careful locksmith lines, but marked with attack positions, false guard placements, balcony routes, and timing notes beside Alexander's opening vow. At the bottom, written in Mason's own hand, were 4 words. "Lock exits before toast." The captain read them aloud. The corridor went silent. Alexander turned to Mason. The king's face no longer held anger. It held judgment. Mason looked at the map, then at Emily, and the hatred in his eyes finally lost its mask. "You should have stayed with the wine." Emily's throat tightened. For 1 second, she was back in the hall with a tray in her hands and a room full of people laughing because a waitress had dared to speak. Then Alexander stepped beside her. "No," he said. "She stood exactly where my kingdom needed her." He took the map from the captain and held it high enough for every guard in the corridor to see. "Bring him to the hall," Alexander ordered. "Let every person he tried to trap see the proof." Mason was dragged past Emily in chains. He did not look at the king. He looked at her, like she was the locked door he had failed to understand. Emily followed them back toward the smoke-lit hall, the stolen map in Alexander's hand, and her father's name finally walking out of disgrace beside her. The hall did not cheer when the proof arrived. It went quiet. That was worse for Mason Vale. Alexander Blackwood stepped back into the grand hall with the stolen map in one hand and smoke moving behind him like a black cloak. Emily Carter followed at his side, not behind him, though every instinct in her body begged her to return to the wall where waitresses were supposed to stand. The broken chandelier still burned in pieces across the marble. The east emergency door hung cracked at its hinge, breathing winter air into the hall. Nobles huddled behind overturned tables. Servants crouched near the sideboards. Captured false guards knelt in a line beneath the ironwood banners, their copied crests stripped from their collars and thrown onto the floor like cheap coins. Mason was dragged in last, in chains. His coat remained elegant, but elegance no longer helped him. Wine and lock chalk marked his sleeve. Soot streaked his jaw. The perfect beta who had smiled at every door now stood before a hall that finally understood what a locked room meant. Alexander lifted the map. "Read it," he said. The captain took it and faced the room. His voice carried through smoke and shame. Attack positions. Balcony route. False guard placement. Exit locks before opening valve. Chandelier release cord. West terrace bolt. North passage containment. Each phrase struck the hall like a door being slammed shut. Someone began to cry. Not loudly. Enough. Mason smiled anyway. Interesting that the waitress knew exactly where to find it. Emily felt the accusation turn toward her before he finished speaking. Old habit. Old cruelty. A room wanting the easy answer. Mason looked at the nobles now, not the king. Her father designed the mechanisms. Her father drew the original plans. Perhaps the Carter family has waited years to finish what he began. The words landed where he meant them to. In rank. In suspicion. In every person who still found it easier to blame a dead locksmith and his daughter than a beta they had toasted beside. Emily's throat tightened. Alexander moved, but she spoke first. "My father designed doors to open during fire." Her voice shook. It carried anyway. Mason changed them to stay closed. Mason's eyes hardened. Emily stepped toward the map, pointing to the careful handwriting in the corner. "These lines show emergency brakes. Hinge pins. Release gaps. Pressure bars. They are all marked outward." Then she pointed to Mason's red wax marks. "These marks reverse them. Chain here. False pin here. Outside bolt here. He did not use my father's design. He murdered it." The hall listened. For the first time, really listened. Then a thin voice broke from the servant's side. "Miss Carter." Emily turned. Daniel, the kitchen boy from the north passage, stood near the sideboard with ash on his face. "Mrs. Bell sent the lower staff to the cellar during the attack. They have not come back." The room changed. Emily looked at the map. Cellar release route. The words from Mason's office burned in her memory. Her eyes moved to the servant's arch. No draft. No movement. No sound of people escaping below. Her skin went cold. "Mason did not only lock the hall," she whispered. Alexander was already looking at her. "What?" Emily grabbed the map from the captain and spread it across the nearest table. Her finger found the cellar line, the servant tunnel, the emergency release that should have led kitchen staff safely into the outer courtyard. Then she saw Mason's red mark over the final door. Containment bar. Inside the cellar. Outside release disabled. Her breath stopped. He trapped them below. A wave of horror moved through the servants. Mrs. Bell staggered against a chair. "There are 20 people down there." Smoke curled thicker near the floor. The fire from the chandelier had not reached the cellar. Not yet. But smoke traveled downward when old vents were cut wrong. And Mason had cut everything wrong tonight. Alexander turned on him. Mason's smile finally faded. "You were supposed to die quickly," he said, voice low. "The rest were unfortunate witnesses." For 1 second, no one moved. Then Alexander struck him. Not wildly. Once. Enough to drive Mason to his knees. "Take him out of my sight," the Alpha King said. Emily was already moving toward the servant's arch. Alexander caught up beside her. "Tell me what you need." She looked at the map. At the smoke. At the hallway where people no one important had counted were trapped beneath their feet. "A crowbar," she said. 2 strong guards. Wet cloths. And no one telling me a waitress has no right to open doors. Alexander's eyes darkened. Then he turned to the hall. "You heard her." This time, the entire room obeyed. The cellar door was not locked to keep enemies out. It was locked to keep servants in. Emily Carter knew it before the crowbar touched the wood. The door stood beneath the servant's arch, half hidden behind stacked wine crates and a curtain of smoke drifting low along the stone floor. It looked ordinary at first glance. Thick oak. Iron bands. Old handle polished by kitchen hands carrying potatoes, flour, wine, and secrets through it for years. But the handle did not hang naturally. It tilted upward by half an inch. A small thing. A cruel thing. Her father would have seen it from across the corridor. Emily knelt and pressed her palm against the lower seam. No air came through. Behind the door, someone coughed. Then another voice answered, muffled and afraid. Mrs. Bell covered her mouth. They're alive. For now, Emily said. Smoke scratched her throat. The wet cloth tied around her mouth smelled of wine and cold water. 2 guards stood beside her with crowbars. Alexander Blackwood stood behind them, one hand on the wall, gray eyes fixed on the door as if he could force it open by command alone. He could not. That was the terrible lesson of the night. Power did not matter if the wrong man had designed the cage. Emily looked at the map spread across a serving tray in the guard captain's hands. Mason's red mark cut across the cellar exit route like a wound. Containment bar inside the lower track, she said. False release on the handle. If we pull too hard, it jams deeper. One guard lowered the crowbar at once. Alexander's gaze moved to her. What opens it? Not the lock. Of course. Never the lock. She slid her fingers along the hinge side until she found the smallest ridge beneath old paint. Her father's emergency notch. Still there. Hidden where only someone who had been taught to look for kindness inside workmanship would think to touch. Her throat tightened. He left a mercy point, she whispered. Alexander heard. Your father? Emily nodded once. In case someone tried to trap people below. A fist struck the other side of the door. Help us. The sound broke the last hesitation in her. Emily took the dark steel knife Alexander had given her and scraped away paint from the notch. Beneath it, a narrow brass pin appeared, blackened with age but untouched by Mason's alterations. He had missed it because it was too low, too plain, too much like something made for servants. Emily almost smiled. Heat, she said. A guard brought the candle. Alexander took it from him and crouched beside her himself. No one commented on the Alpha King kneeling in smoke beside a waitress. No one dared. The flame kissed the brass pin. Wax hidden inside the seam softened, smelling bitter and old. Emily pressed the knife point into the notch and twisted. Nothing. Her bruised wrist screamed. She tried again. Alexander's hand covered hers, steady and warm through the smoke. Again, he said. Together, they turned the blade. The pin shifted. Only a breath. Enough. Now, Emily said. Crowbar under the hinge. Lift, do not pull. The guards moved. Wood groaned. Iron protested. The door rose half an inch from the lower track, and suddenly air burst through the seam, carrying smoke, coughing, and the desperate sound of people realizing the world had not abandoned them. Again, Emily ordered. The guards lifted harder. The containment bar cracked. The cellar door burst inward. Smoke rolled out. Servants stumbled through it one after another. Kitchen boys, scullery maids, wine porters, dishwashers, a flour-covered cook carrying a girl no older than 12. Faces gray, eyes streaming, hands gripping each other because darkness had made them family before rank ever could. Mrs. Bell sobbed. Emily stepped back to let them pass, but the youngest girl caught her apron. You opened it, the child whispered. Emily looked down at her. For 1 second, she could not answer. All her life, doors had told her where she was not allowed to go. Tonight, she had learned they could also remember who deserved to live. Alexander stood slowly as the last servant was carried out. The hall watched him. No, the hall watched her. Mason Vale's map had exposed treason. The cellar door had exposed something worse. He had not only tried to kill a king. He had decided servants were acceptable losses. Alexander turned toward the smoke-filled hall, his voice low enough to make every noble hear the shame inside it. The people Mason left to die are the people this house stands on. Then he looked at Emily, still holding the knife, soot on her face, apron stained, wrist bruised, eyes bright with smoke and fury. And she opened the door. The servants came out coughing before the nobles found words. That was what changed the hall. Not the arrows. Not the fallen chandelier. Not even Mason Vale's map spread across the serving table with its red marks and cold instructions. It was the sight of kitchen boys with soot on their cheeks, scullery maids gripping each other's sleeves, a wine porter limping on a twisted ankle, Mrs. Bell sobbing into the shoulder of a flour-covered cook, a 12-year-old girl wrapped in a wet tablecloth, still clutching Emily Carter's apron, as if letting go might send her back below. The people Ironwood never counted had almost died beneath its polished floor, and every noble had to watch them breathe. Emily stood beside the broken cellar door with Alexander Blackwood's knife still in her hand. Her wrist throbbed. Her throat burned from smoke. Her knees wanted to fold under her, but the child's fingers remained tangled in her apron, so Emily stayed upright. Sometimes courage was not a roar. Sometimes it was refusing to fall while someone smaller was still holding on. Alexander turned to his captain. Healers to the servants first. A council elder stepped forward, pale and shaken. Your Majesty, several alphas are injured near the high table. Alexander looked at him. The elder stopped speaking. The servants first, the Alpha King repeated. No one argued the second time. That was when Mason laughed. It was not a loud sound. It did not need to be. He stood in chains near the shattered chandelier, soot on his coat, blood at one corner of his mouth, still trying to look like a man above consequence. You will weaken yourself in front of every pack here, he said. Over kitchen staff. Over a waitress. Emily felt the old room try to return. The room where rank mattered more than truth. The room where a man like Mason could say waitress and make it sound like a stain. But the child at Emily's side looked up. She opened the door. The girl whispered. Small voice. Huge silence. A kitchen boy, still coughing, lifted his head. Miss Carter told them where to lift. A wine porter added. The handle was a trap. She knew. Mrs. Bell wiped her face with shaking hands. Her father would have known too. Emily went still. Mrs. Bell looked at her, guilt and grief crossing the hard lines of her face. I was here the night Thomas Carter was dismissed. I said nothing. Mason told us your father had endangered the house. Mason's expression changed. Only a fraction. Enough. Emily could not breathe. Alexander saw it. Speak. Mrs. Bell turned toward the hall. Thomas Carter refused to build sealed exits for private military drills. He said an emergency door that could trap servants was a murder waiting for a reason. The next morning, Mason accused him of tampering with royal locks. He was removed before sunrise. The hall went quiet in a different way. Not fear. Shame. Emily lowered her eyes, but not from obedience. From the weight of years suddenly being lifted too fast. Her father had died with people whispering careless, dishonest, disgraced. She had carried those words with serving trays, through kitchens, under chandeliers, past men who never knew they were walking through buildings he had kept safe. Alexander stepped toward Mason. You ruined the man who would not help you build this trap. Mason's mouth tightened. He was sentimental. He was loyal, Alexander said. The word struck Emily harder than she expected. Loyal. Not disgraced. Not foolish. Loyal. Alexander took the stolen map from the captain and laid it beside the original Carter design pulled from Mason's office. One showed exits opening outward, breakpoints marked for fire, servant routes protected. The other showed chains, false pins, containment bars, and attack positions. He faced the hall. Let every witness see the difference. The documents passed from guard to elder to alpha representative. No one spoke while they looked. No one could. The truth was no longer a waitress's accusation. It was ink, metal, smoke, and rescued breath. Mason's gaze found Emily. Hatred lived there now without its mask. You think this makes you important? Emily's fingers tightened around the knife. Then she looked at the servants sitting along the wall, alive because her father had hidden mercy in a hinge. She looked at the east door, breathing winter air. She looked at Alexander, who had believed her before the hall deserved it. No, she said. It makes them alive. For the first time, Mason had no answer. Alexander turned to his guards. Take him to the center of the hall. Mason was dragged forward beneath the broken chandeliers, past nobles he had fooled, past servants he had chosen to abandon, past the doors he had locked and failed to keep closed. Emily thought the child would finally release her apron. She did not. So Emily walked with her. And when Alexander Blackwood stopped before the entire Alliance Council, he did not stand alone. At his right stood the waitress who had warned him. At her side stood the people the Beta had decided did not matter. The trial of Mason Vale began with the smell of smoke still in the air and every door in Ironwood Pack House standing open. The trial did not need a courtroom. It needed open doors. Alexander Blackwood stood in the center of Ironwood Pack House with smoke still staining the rafters and winter air moving through every exit Mason Vale had tried to seal. The east emergency door hung broken at its hinge. The west terrace stood open to the night. The servants' cellar door remained wide enough for anyone passing to see the blackened stairway below and understand what almost happened there. No one sat at the high table now. No one deserved to. The Alliance Council stood in a half-circle around the shattered chandelier. Nobles, guards, servants, kitchen boys, Luna representatives, and Alpha Lords all faced the same place. Mason Vale on his knees in chains, with copied crests, silver blades, false pins, and stolen maps laid on the marble before him. Small things, quiet things, the kind of things Emily Carter had been trained by life to notice because no one had ever trained the powerful to look down. Alexander lifted the Carter design in one hand and Mason's attack map in the other. One opened doors during fire, he said. One locked them before murder. The hall did not breathe. Thomas Carter was not dismissed for incompetence. He was ruined because he refused to build a cage for innocent people. Emily's throat tightened. Her father's name moved through the hall like a man coming home after years in the cold. Mason raised his head. You think restoring a dead locksmith saves your throne? Alexander looked at him. No, he said. A waitress did that. Every eye turned to Emily. She stood with soot on her face, wine on her apron, bruises at her wrist, and the 12-year-old servant girl still holding her hand. She wanted to step back. She wanted the wall. She wanted the old safety of being unseen. But the doors were open now, and she had opened too many of them to disappear behind one. Alexander faced the council. Emily Carter warned me before the first arrow. She moved me before the shot. She saw the false guards, the locked exits, the altered hinges, the cellar trap, and the proof hidden in my Beta's office. She saved my life, this council, and every servant Mason Vale left below to die. Mason laughed once, bitter and broken. She is still a waitress. Alexander stepped closer to him. The room went cold. The waitress you mocked is the reason your king is alive. Mason's face hardened. Alexander's voice lowered. And the people you called acceptable losses are the reason this house will never again belong only to men with titles. He turned to the guards. Mason Vale is stripped of rank, property, authority, and name. Every order he gave under my seal will be reviewed. Every family harmed by his lies will be compensated from his estate. Thomas Carter's record will be restored by royal decree. Emily closed her eyes. For one breath, she was a child again in her father's shop, watching his hands move over brass, iron, keys, hinges, and mercy points hidden for strangers he would never meet. Then Alexander said her name. Emily Carter. She opened her eyes. He stood before her now, not above her from the high table, not across a room full of people laughing at her fear, but close enough for the smoke in his coat to mix with the wine and soot on hers. You asked for no reward, he said. I wanted the doors open. They are. She looked around. They were. Every exit in Ironwood Pack House stood open beneath guard and witness. Winter air entered freely. Servants sat beside nobles receiving care from the same healers. Mrs. Bell held the rescued child against her side. Daniel the kitchen boy stood straighter than Emily had ever seen him. Alexander turned so the hall could hear. From this moment, Emily Carter is under my protection. She will not return to service unless she chooses it. Her father's designs will be restored to Ironwood law. No royal gathering under my rule will begin until she, or someone trained by her, has inspected every door. A murmur moved through the room. Not mockery. All. Emily looked at him, stunned. Your Majesty, I am not. A title does not teach a person where the trap is, Alexander said. You already proved that. The servant girl finally released Emily's hand. Not because she no longer needed her. Because she wanted to bow. One by one, the servants bowed first. Then the guards. Then the nobles, slower, ashamed, but bowing all the same. Emily Carter had entered the night with a champagne tray, invisible beneath chandeliers built to shine on everyone else. She left it standing beside the Alpha King. Every locked door opened behind her. Her father's name cleared before the Alliance, and an entire hall alive because a waitress had noticed the exit sign was dead.